What do you call that noise?
The XTC Podcast.
What do you call that noise?
What do you call that noise?
Hello and welcome back to What Do You Call That Noise, the XTC podcast, where this month we've got a very special treat in store for fans of Skylarking. My name is Mark Fisher, and in this episode we'll be looking not only backwards but also forwards to Dear God, Old and New. More of that in due course, but to get you in the swing of things, let's have some listener-generated music. For the past few episodes, I've been challenging the musicians among you to write a song in response to something that has been said on the podcast. A conversation about playgrounds in XTC songs inspired Ed Stainsby to write Climbing Frame.
I've been thinking all day about the climbing frame.
An analysis of No Thugs in Our House gave David White the idea to write Still Got It.
I let my toffee nosy neighbours stay.
The name of the podcast led Gary Perkins to write What Do You Call That Noise?
The neighbors rang to say they've not seen enough about my music out loud.
Further discussion of English settlement prompted Chris Badley to write Round and Around.
And round it goes, reaping what we sow. And round it goes, 'cause that's all we know. And round it goes, going with the flow. And round it goes, and round it goes.
And now, here is Craig Stevens to introduce this month's song.
What do you call that noise?
I was listening to my favourite XTC themed podcast, thinking about what a gift their music had been to me when Mark Fisher said that Limelight had had a headline of "We Are Not Alone." And the words "a gift" and "alone" kind of coalesced into the idea of this song. So lyrically, I threw together terms to do with finance and references to XTC lyrics. And musically, I wanted it to sound like a distant relative of This Is Pop, No Thugs in Our House, Respectable Street, Statue of Liberty. And the last thing I listened to before I started to write this was Extrovert. If you'd like to hear the full version, you can hear it at soundcloud.com. If you search for Made in Macau, Macau, you can hear my music there. Thanks for listening.
What do you call that noise?
Playground rules are chained and bound to succeed. The notes burning coins melt, roads are the glow spell. Cats and dogs start to interbreed. Just like a crusader, a general or major, we fight the good fight of the heaven blast. Time was invested and growth not arrested, so you drink it in like a baby at the breast. We're not alone. Interest as Venus gets undressed, signing your life on the dotted line. With time at a premium, I'm calling our media. Where in the world where the stakes are high? The compound is growing, dwarves are high-hoeing, and dandelions will go up through the cracks. You held my note, but the icebound bolts, and a quick fire blows and quack. We're not alone. We're not alone. the mowing of grass. If we could touch you and see you, no words can convey, they just get in the way. So mark what the fishermen say.
Great stuff. Thank you so much for that, Craig. If you were a songwriter and have been inspired by something we have discussed on What Do You Call That Noise, the XTC podcast, please send your song to mark@xtclimelight.com. Fame and fortune awaits. A quick thank you to Kevin Windsor, who recently recorded a backstage interview with members of XTC in Exeter, and front of house interviews with fans who had turned out to see them. I'll be sharing that interview exclusively with supporters on Patreon to thank them for making this podcast possible. And if you've been enjoying the podcasts and would like them to continue, it would be tremendous if you could join the Pink Things, Humble Daisies and Knights in Shining Karma on Patreon. All you have to do is go to patreon.com/Mark Fisher and choose your level of support. And if you choose to join the Knights in Shining Karma, I'll read out your name at the end of this episode. And if you haven't done so already, you should pop over to xtclimelight.com, where you'll be able to buy a copy of What Do You Call That Noise, an XTC Discovery book. The 228-page book brings together some of the world's leading musicians, including Rick Buckler of The Jam, Chris Difford of Squeeze, and Debbie Peterson of The Bangles, to discuss what makes XTC so very, very special.
What do you call that noise?
With me today, making a return appearance on What Do You Call That Noise, the XTC podcast, is Leslie Gooch, waking up bright and early in Texas. How are you doing, Leslie?
Very well, thanks. I'd be with you.
Fantastic to have you back on again. And with us today, Leslie and I are going to be asking the questions to two very, very special guests. First, let's welcome Ralph Legnini, who is a good friend of Todd Rundgren's and was his production and studio manager during the recording of Skylarking and most everything else he did while he lived in Woodstock. Hello, Ralph.
How you doing today?
I'm doing fantastically, not least because you're with us, which is particularly exciting. And Ralph was in the studio every day with XTC during the recording of Skylarking, and they often hung out in his house for dinner in the evening. So we'll be finding out more about that. And then, very, very special indeed, a voice that is known to XTC fans almost as much as that of Andy Partridge and Colin Moulding. It's Jasmine Veillette, who was the 8-year-old vocalist on Dear God. Hello, Jasmine.
Hello, nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. We've got a lot of catching up to do, but these days Jasmine is a musician, an independent stylist, a mother, a music dreamer, it says on one of her social media presences, and a lover of Motown and K-pop. What's old is new, she says. Very true.
That's it.
And she's fragile but shatterproof. So we won't be making things too rough for her, but but hopefully she won't break if we do.
Well, I think we'll be okay.
I think we will be. Maybe, Ralph, because you are the senior member of the interviewees, we should start with your memories because you were responsible for bringing Jasmine in the first place. Is that right?
That's right. When they were working on Dear God, they decided they wanted a kid to sing the beginning, the first, not just a line. They wanted the whole first initial opening verse and the tag portion at the very end. So typically Todd would, say to me, look, we need a string quartet Sunday night at 2 a.m. or whatever. And I would figure out how to do that. So he was like, well, could you find somebody? And Andy was like, yeah, could you know someone? I said, did it need to be a girl or a boy? And they didn't really care. I just had to sound like a little kid. So I knew Jasmine since she was a baby, and I'm really good friends with her dad, Joe Veillette, who's a guitar maker, has Veillette guitars in Woodstock, New York. And Jasmine had been singing all her life. She was, used to singing with headphones on, with microphones, singing with her parents. Her parents had a band. Jane and Joe played together in a band called the Phantoms. So I knew that she she was like totally together as a little kid and super smart, super quick learner. So I didn't think of anyone else except her when they said they need a little kid. It was like, well, yeah, of course, Jasmine. So I remember I got a cassette, I believe, from Andy or Todd. I don't remember whether it was the demos for the song or whether it was the track in progress that Andy did a scratch vocal on, or maybe he just strummed guitar and played.
I feel like it
the
was
song.
relatively close to being finished.
All right, so it was the track, and Andy sang the the vocal as he perceived it for a kid to sing, and I went over, gave it to Jasmine, and it was worked on. She worked on it to learn how Andy was singing the song. The key was like perfect for her, but in the time that I went to find Jasmine and give her the song, I remember Andy and the guys and Todd, were kind of fretting, oh, we want a kid, but, you're going to bring a kid in here. It's going to take forever. And it may not be right. And, they were fretting about the process of doing it. But anyway,
We want a kid that's a pro.
yeah, they didn't know what they were getting, right? So, and Todd doesn't like to spend a lot of time in the studio. He likes to work quickly and move on. So, we brought Jasmine up. Was it in the morning or afternoon? I can't remember.
I
During the
think
day.
it was
Did you cut-
afternoon.
did
It
you
was
cut
probably
school?
after school.
Did
No,
you
it
cut
was-
school?
I'm pretty sure it was after school.
So she went up, and the way Todd's studio was, it was very rustic. It was downstairs was the recording room, and upstairs was a loft on about 1/3 of the upstairs. The rest had a high ceiling, and you could look through the a window in the loft down to the person singing. So we put headphones on. Jasmine got in front of the mic, and Todd got a level. And my recollection is like Jasmine just sang it, like from beginning to end, and it was perfect. And she had all Andy's little British pronunciations of a few words and then vocal inflections and everything. He just like totally nailed it. And I remember in the control room, everyone was like in a state of shock, And then it was fast forward to the very end where she had to sing the last "Dear God" and hold the note, and she did that. I remember it was. I don't remember your recollection of it. No, your recollection, but it was done relatively quickly.
I think maybe 2 takes.
Yeah, I think maybe one take just to get a little
To set
comfortable.
it, yeah.
And Todd was like,
So I
"Okay,
could get the timing.
yeah, let's try it." So, it was a wrap. And look, we've all been in the studios where a vocalist takes forever to do a vocal and punches in individual words and everything. But this was like a perfect take and very inspired. And I think that to start a song like that, a little kid doing it, you have to really do something well to make it, to pull it off. And Jasmine totally nailed it.
And do your memories, because you were only 8, Jasmine, do your
Yeah.
memories coincide with that?
I actually have a pretty good memory of a lot of it, because I didn't do that kind of stuff every day. So, excuse me. I mean, I did sing with my parents in their gigs a lot, but that was just very common to me. So being in the studio, I'd seen my parents recording, so I kind of knew, the seriousness of it and stuff like that. I remember my dad bringing me a cassette tape into my room and saying, "Put this in your recorder and listen to it." And he showed me the parts I had to learn. And he goes, "Learn it. And, we'll probably get back together with Ralph in a couple days." And I did it. I listened to it quite a few times on my thing while I was coloring and whatever I was doing. And I remember writing down the words. I remember writing down the words and having the words next to me. And I was like, playing. I was 8.5 or something like that.
Probably not much different than if your dad asked you to learn a song for one of his gigs or
Pretty
something.
much,
Yeah.
pretty much. So I just, I remember walking up to the studio with Dad and feeling kind of nervous, but it was like, this is just like any other time you sing. This is just, people like your voice and they want you to just participate on their song, and nothing probably will happen with it. So just take it easy and relax and just be about having fun. So I was coming from it with no pressure. I had no clue what was going on. I remember sitting on this kind of high stool, and I had like a view in a mirror or something of Todd, and I could kind of see my dad, and I remember Todd saying, Ralph and your dad are right here, so just yell, because I was in this room. And
You're all by yourself
it
downstairs.
felt
Yeah.
pretty big. I'm sure it wasn't super big, but it felt pretty big. And I was a small kid, so I remember like my feet dangling and stuff. I was on a stool. So I remember singing the first verse, and I remember him saying, "Okay, that's good. Come on up." And I was like, "Did I do something wrong?" And he was like, No, it's perfect. Come on up, and we're going to listen to it." So I went up and I listened, and he was like, "Okay, now we're going to go back down and you're going to do the part at the end." And I think I did it twice. And he was like, "That's it. You're done." And I remember kind of feeling like not sure if I did a good job, because I'd remembered my parents recording takes over and over. I just remember feeling kind of unsure, like, did I do everything okay? And they were like, "No, you did it perfect." And I think I remember being told I was in and out in 45 minutes.
It's particularly amazing given the impact that song had, not only as a song in itself, in the culture, in American culture in particular, but also in boosting XTC's career, because they were, going through a quiet patch at that time, and yet this is, your contribution to it happened so fast.
It's pretty interesting the way it all
it just clicked
funneled out.
It just clicked together. It was kind of in the flow of the way Todd did stuff. He did things, he did things really quickly, and he was really confident in his decisions, and a lot of things just moved along in his studio when we worked that.
Yeah. And Jasmine, were you? What was your awareness after that song had been recorded about its fate and the album?
Well, I mean, at 8, I had an idea of. My parents were very open as far as raising me. I was pretty self-aware that religion was a pretty heavy topic, and anything that touched on God or anything like that, even at 8, I was aware of. So I found it kind of, I don't know, for an 8-year-old to be singing about the price of beer, I was like, oh, I'm kind of an adult right now. So I thought it was a pretty cool topic for a kid to be singing about. And I could actually even relate to the concept of, if everything is so crazy, how can there be something that's supposed to be like making sure everything's not, So as a kid, I could kind of wrap my brain around what they were trying to poke at, even at 8. So I remember the whole thing was like, nothing's probably going to come from this. It's just a cool thing to add, because I was starting to kind of do sessions at that point in other ways. So it was like, it's just a cool thing to add to your resume. And when it was released and the song wasn't on it, I had album credit, and he was like, "See, look, this is a great lesson. You did this thing and it didn't turn out, but you got recognized for your contribution, and this is something we can put in your portfolio." And that's kind of where we left it at that. And I was really psyched that I got to even do that. So then we put a pin in that, and that's where it was for however many months until the next phase kicked in, I guess,
I find that interesting. I don't know if at 8 I would be. I guess I started to think, along those same lines. It was several years before I started thinking more critically. But I keep thinking, this is going to be a silly question, but I keep thinking, how many times, Jasmine, through your life have you had that song come on and like you're looking around to grab somebody and say, "Hey, that's me"?
Actually, it doesn't happen that often, believe it or not. But it happens for like my cousin. And even when it was subsided for many, many years, I'd be like 15 and I'd get a phone call, and my dad would be like, "Oh, cousin Rachel heard XTC when she was in the car." But they live in Long Island. It's more downstate. So there was college radio. She was a college student. So it was just a whole different world for me. I was into pop. Like I was in my teens, whatever was on the radio, that what I was into. But my parents weren't an oldies band, so I was into way old material for my age. It's not normal for an 8-year-old to know who the Beatles are, but I did. It's not normal for an 8-year-old to know what a British invasion was, but I did. So I had a really non-traditional upbringing. I was in bars almost every weekend with my parents when they were gigging, and I was sleeping under a drum riser. So I was seeing a lot of things I shouldn't be seeing from the age I was probably 5 up.
So you knew about the price of beer.
I knew about the price of beer, yes, and scotch and whiskey and other things that kids shouldn't know about. But it gave me a very real perception and not a very fairy tale storybook that kids get, So I never feel like I was like missing out on anything that a normal kid should have, because to me, it was perfectly normal and I feel like I had a great childhood. So like all that heavy religion stuff was kind of just stuff I was already exposed to, for lack of a better way to put it, being around so many adults.
And did your peers, I suppose, the people at school and all the rest of it would have all been naturally the same age as you, and therefore they also would be maybe a little bit too young to be. They weren't listening to college radio to have heard that song. So
no, they had no idea. I mean, I had a lot of friends that had musicians as parents, so they understood, I'm going to do a session or something like that, or I went and did a recording. But most of my friends really, that wasn't even something we talked about. It was just like, my parents are musicians and we have guitars around everywhere and microphones everywhere. And I would often go to their house to like not have to deal with that other stuff, because all they wanted to do was like strum on guitars and sing in microphones and stuff. And I just kind of wanted to be a kid sometimes too.
Every once in a while.
Every once in a while. So they didn't really understand any of that, at all. I think until I was a little older and I actually did a cartoon the theme song with John Sebastian for the Care Bears cartoon. And then some of my friends were like, oh, wow, Care Bears. So that just literally shows you that split that I was in.
So you really didn't, until maybe the Care Bears, you didn't go through that sort of Justin Bieber or I'm trying to think of other child stars.
I mean, you also have to understand I grew up in Woodstock. So everybody's jaded there. Everybody has parents that are musicians, or a family member that's a musician, or knows somebody famous, or is somebody famous. And
it's a really small town.
It's really small. Everybody knows everybody. So there was never any of that, like, oh, wow, she did that. There was never any of that. So, which is good, I feel like, for a kid to, it was just another day. It was just another day.
Totally, because the number of people who've been completely screwed up by their childhood experiences, however exciting that they were, is great. I think that number of people, and so it was good that you escaped any of that damage. And following up Leslie's question about being in a supermarket when you hear it coming on the radio or something like that, did you go through a phase of being embarrassed by your 8-year-old voice because it was in the same way that we are embarrassed about our childhoods, or were you always reconciled with it?
I feel like I was always just proud of it. I feel like it was, I always kind of got the vibe that it was a pretty cool thing that I was a part of. And I always grasped that. So, I would hear people say, oh, your voice, it's so cute. And your voice is so, but then I hear people say, oh, you sound exactly the same. And I don't feel like I sound exactly the same. But, he thought I sounded pretty similar when I sang it to him. So a couple months ago, he's like, oh, you sound the same. So I guess it's all in the beholder, as they say.
Quite strange, because voices do obviously develop a huge amount in between 8 and 18. And what about the rest of the album, Jasmine? Did you pay attention to the rest of the album, and did you become an XTC fan? Has it just been?
At the time, I did not at all. But in my older years, I would say late teens, early 20s, I went on like a curiosity trip. Like, what is this group that I'm literally tied to forever in a great way? But who are they as musicians? Because I never, I never really thought about that when I was younger. And I find, well, first of all, from Skylarking itself, I think the first song was probably my favorite one. And I just feel like it has a lot of things I like in a song as far as songwriting and lyric content and the feels that you get. As far as the other stuff, I only, within the last 10 years or so, really started to delve into some of their discography. And I am by no means up on their material or anything like that, but I totally get why they have such a huge fan base. And the inspiration that their music pulls from, I can relate to. Like, I can hear bits of this and bits of this genre and bits of this group, and the way they encompass everything together but are still themselves, I find to be probably the coolest thing.
Yeah, well, but I imagine particularly as you're saying, your parents were into oldies music and you grew up with that. Basically, it sounds like you grew up with the influences that XTC grew up with, except you were just that much younger.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, they had a cover, like a cover band, right?
Yeah.
50s cover band, and also an a cappella group.
Yeah, there was a doo-wop a cappella group that did openers for big acts. And then they had a musical group that was instruments and 5 vocals. So everybody sang like 50s up, I would say at that point. It was like 50s and 60s when I was young. So the Beach Boys and the Beatles and anything and everything harmony they did, and they did really well. And so that was what I grew up on, and funk and Motown. And then when I grew up, my change in music kind of went off of that, and I went through a blues phase and a funk phase, and then a hard top 40 phase, like all Madonna, all Cyndi Lauper, all Michael Jackson. I went through all of these things that then I realized were all kind of tied back to the stuff that I had been listening to when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because all of those later groups are influenced by the stuff that obviously came before it. And now having a teenager, well, three, but an 18-year-old that's into K-pop and got into K-pop when she was 12, that totally opened my eyes too to the same concept of like that old being new again. And K-pop is based on like Motown and the 80s, and that's all the stuff that I love. So it's been really interesting to kind of pull from all of that. And I feel like groups like XTC that take from all of those bits of genres and make it their own, I think that's pretty inspirational, you know?
Yeah, and I think one thing to be said about XTC is exactly as you're saying it, that they're beyond the category pop. You can't label them as actually many of the things you just said. You can't label them as funk. You can't label them as heavy metal. You can't label them as jazz, although they might have elements of all of those things in there. And that sort of openness,
Right.
which is the same openness that the Beatles had and other groups that you mentioned, I think is possibly, accounts for the longevity as well.
Yeah, for sure. Because they're more popular now, aren't they, than they ever were?
What do you think, Leslie? Would you say that, Leslie?
Do you think?
Well, I mean, I have my perspective, so I've been a fan for a long time. I became a really keen fan when None Such came out, but that was pretty much it. I didn't even know their whole catalog until This Is Pop, the documentary, came out, and I think that served a lot. I think, people who were already kind of in the super fan category really love that. But I think there are a lot of us, I've connected with a lot of people who really love the band, but saw that documentary and just, it supercharged their fan status. And then, a lot of us have connected online, and that's, I met you, Mark, and so many people, and it feels like it's really grown, but I don't know what it was before, really. I mean, I think the numbers in those like Facebook groups and such have really grown. So yeah, it does.
Well, social media was huge for that, for sure.
Yeah, and I think maybe there's, just because the passage of time, there are younger musicians who are recognizing this band that had been sort of slightly or very neglected over the years and so on, and being inspired by them. Yeah. I'm thinking of one more Dear God question, Jasmine, which is what it feels like to watch the video of Dear God and some your voice comes out to some other boy's voice.
That too.
It's a little. It's a little creepy. It's a little creepy. Full disclosure, it's a little creepy. But it's okay. I get it. I get the storyline. I get what they were going for. I do remember seeing some interview in a magazine or a newspaper or something where they gave a story like, oh, well, we didn't think she'd want to be flown out to shoot the video and miss school. Like, no, it was the storyline. It's okay to just say it was the storyline. I'm sure they got that question a million times, and I'm sure it was annoying.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, it's.
Well, I remember when you were a little kid, you told your friends that you sang on the song.
And they saw the
and
video.
then they saw on MTV this little boy singing it, and they said, well, you didn't sing it. I saw the video. A little boy sang it.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a drag for
Proof.
Yeah,
us
I forgot
that
about that, actually. Yeah, I forgot
she
about
couldn't,
that.
they thought she was lying about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I actually brought in the album one day or something to show people or something because yeah, I remember that now. That was kind of weird. But now I feel like it's pretty cool. And I think the video, I showed my daughter the video. My daughter heard the song for the first time when they used it in It.
Oh.
And she was like, she went to see It in the movie. And she had seen like heard little bits of Dear God. Just probably clicked it for a second and not really listened to it. But she went to see it in the theater with her grandparents, her paternal grandparents. And she texted me after. She was like, Mom, the song is in the movie. And I was like, I know, Leah. And she's like, no, it's your entire verse. And then they cut it. Like the only part that they play in the movie is your part. And I was like, oh. So I found that to be pretty cool, I must say. I'm also a Stephen King fan, so that was pretty neat. But yeah, it's just a pretty awesome thing to be connected to.
Yeah, and it feels like it's quite nice in a way because you've had none of the downsides of fame, and all of the upsides. The knowledge that you've done, the knowledge that you've done something good, and none of the the hassle that you might have got with all that.
I mean, it is kind of fun. It's not like you go out and people are like, I know who you are, but 2-3 times a year, I get a random message on one of my social medias. Are you ... And it's kind of fun,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So Ralph, I wondered whether we definitely should talk a little bit more about Skylarking and the whole experience of there, but maybe can we go back even further than that and talk about how your relationship with Todd began?
Oh, wow. Well, I moved up. I got out of college, majored in music. I moved to Pawling, New York for a little bit, and then I moved to Woodstock because of the music scene. And doing gigs up here was a very vibrant, cool place to be if you were a musician. And my girlfriend at the time was looking for work. She was a singer, and she went to Todd Rundgren's video studio in Bearsville because there was this word out there that they were looking for people to help. And she went in and introduced herself, and that day she was hanging lights and, painting sets and everything, they really needed people to help. So, and then I met Todd also through that, and we became, little by little friends with Todd, and then, eventually started working for him in the studio. I was like a studio manager, production manager, doing a lot of things. It was just like a one-man shop, basically. It was him, and lots of times he'd be working all day into the night. And I was like, Todd, have you eaten today? He's like, no. Do you want to go get you a sandwich? Okay. That kind of stuff. He would just work all day, all night. He was up there a lot by himself. And truly the Hermit of Mikalo, was in effect, not all the time, but a lot of the time. He was just so driven to do his music. And when he got on a project, he just worked nonstop on it. So, I did a lot of things to expedite what he was trying to accomplish and make it easier for him and make sure there were no things that were going to fall apart or no problem areas that were going to, creep up and try to make things run really smooth, And it was really cool because eventually when he was going out on tour and everything, he would say, Ralph, you should, if you want to use the studio, use it because it's better to use a studio than to have it sit dormant. So I would bring in, some of my own projects to produce sometimes. And, if it was a paying client, I would give Todd some money from it and, just use the studio. And so it was like, that was, my life revolved around a lot of what he was doing at the time. And of course, I learned as a producer. I mean, what better thing to learn is to be in the studio with Todd all the time and see how he did stuff, which a lot was very unorthodox compared to other producers. But
and you've also touched on that thing already about how quick he is and how fast he makes his decisions. Which if you talk to the members, of XTC, they sometimes think that can be a downside because they were very fastidious and wanting all that detail.
Exactly.
But what are the pros and cons of that?
But that's how Todd was. He was extremely confident to make quick decisions. I mean, here's one quick story when he was working on the second Bat Out of Hell album, and Jim Steinman was up, and they did, I can't remember, it was guitar solos or vocal takes of Meatloaf, and they did like 10 takes, and they had to erase most of them because it was on 24-track tape to move on. And Steinman was like, could you make me a cassette or a CD of that? I'll listen to it in the car over the weekend. And Todd was like, why can't we decide right now? Because Todd would just decide right then and there and be totally confident and wipe the other 10 tracks, So that's how he worked on everything. He felt, I think, that if he belabored things too much, the inspiration dissipates. And he always said, look, it doesn't, people don't listen to records because the sound on the hi-hat that some engineer spent a day getting, it has no bearing really on whether the record is going to be successful. And he also said, if you listen to every record, the drum sounds different on every record. It's not like you're going for a particular thing and you finally get it and that's going to make a hit. So he had a very different way of approaching everything. And he was very, he was strict with himself in the studio, which was probably pretty easy because he was so brilliant and could do everything. But he also brought that to the table when he was producing other people. And, if someone wasn't singing something right, he could look up from, reading a computer magazine and press the talkback button and sing it perfectly in their headphones. So it could be intimidating a lot of times to artists because he just was so together and so brilliant. And I think that's where, the thing with Andy, I wasn't that aware that was going on. So it wasn't like super blatant, like the stories that came out afterwards that they were fighting all the time. I remember it being a pretty, joyous work progress. And like I said, once a week or so, the guys would come to my house. We make Italian food and hang out, and everyone was there. Everyone was getting along. A lot of joking around, kidding around. But I could see for artists like Andy, making an album is a big, it's a big deal. And he was used to his methodology, and Todd had a different workflow, and I think that's where the clash was. I think the other two members of the band like working with Todd because I think he really saw what they brought to the table. And I remember him telling Andy, if I wanted to produce an Andy Partridge album, I would produce an Andy Partridge album. But I took this project because I wanted to produce an XTC album, and he saw, I think, the three of them as equals in XTC. Like when he had his band Utopia, they were all equals in that, with the songwriting, publishing, and with that aspect, but also in the creative elements, And I think that's where he envisioned the record. But I don't remember coming to blows or anything like that. I don't remember the way it was. The setup, Todd, it was very unique. He had his house up on top of the hill, and then down the hill was the studio, and below that was what we called the guest house, which was a big old country house. And we're like all houses in Woodstock, they were kind of, it wasn't a mansion. It was a little bit funky, but everything up here was that way. And we had two vans that were decked out that the bands drove around in. One of them had a bed in the back. They were big old Dodge vans, and so Todd did, provided everything for the bands when they came. So I do remember the guys from XTC came, and one of the first things they did in the guest house, they got some big pieces of cardboard or wood, and they made these soldiers out of paper, and they made this whole battleground. It was like some board game that they actually built themselves that they played. I had no idea how it went, but it was so intricate what they made. I was really blown away.
I know Andy has designed several games.
Is that what so they've talked about that?
I don't know if that specific one, but Mark, do you know more about that? I just know that over the years he's designed several games.
I've never heard it specifically in relation to Skylarking, which seems to be why it's particularly fascinating. Yeah.
To me, my memory was one of the first things that they did when they got here. I was like, all right, we got to get this. Got to get this game going. There wasn't that much to do. Woodstock's a small town. The next nearest town is Kingston, where there's like a mall and fast food and stuff like that. But Woodstock is pretty rural, and Todd's like 3 miles down the end of a rural road in, Mink Hollow Road. And to get to Woodstock's a good, probably 10-minute drive from there. And, there's not a lot to do, so they made themselves entertained, and they worked a lot in the studio.
No, didn't they want to come when I was recording and he put his foot down and told them no?
I don't remember that. I don't remember. I remember Andy was there.
I don't think I spoke to Andy the other day and said I was doing this, and he mentioned that he hadn't met Jasmine. I don't think he's ever met you.
Oh, so he wasn't he wasn't there that day. It was just Todd. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I remember like reading or something that they had wanted to be there, and he was like, no, because it's a little kid and we don't want her to be intimidated and feel like pressure. And they were like peeking in the window or something like that.
Oh, I don't remember that.
Yeah. I mean, I read it, I feel like, in a magazine or something. Yeah, I wouldn't, on hindsight now, it would have been really pretty cool to have met them, but is what it is. Maybe someday,
you never know. and Ralph, I'm fascinated by your observation that there didn't seem to be a bad atmosphere in the studio, because you're exactly right. That's not the message that many stories have been told about those sessions because of the people involved in it. I think either from both Todd's point of view and from Andy's point of view, both of them seem to be having quite a rough time. But other stories that you get from XTC in other studios for other albums, the impression you get is that they were just very amusing and good company. And is that what you found particularly like when you were inviting them around to dinner and stuff?
Yeah, they were a lot of fun. I remember having a lot of laughs. There were times where I think it's written in the wiki about the album where Todd said to Andy, you could stay here and mess around all day. I'm going to go back up to the house, and when I come back, call me when you realize it's not going to work, and we'll come back and do it my way. Right? That was a famous quote. And I'm sure they were like incidents like that, but there weren't like that I recall fights about it. It was just like Andy would, get, that would be annoying to him, and Todd would go up to the house, and then they would come back and keep working. But generally it was a really good atmosphere that I remember. I remember, like I said, they'd come over to the house, we'd have dinner, have laughs, drink beer, and it just didn't seem much different than any other album. I know Todd was surprised that after the album was done and the guys went home, that then Andy expressed that he was, really unhappy with a lot of things. And I remember Todd being surprised about that. Because I didn't think in the studio that anything was going on that was any different than any band and producer making a record that I observed over the years of doing stuff,
I think you already really touched on, from my perspective or my understanding, the kind of core problem was just the approach, right? Because Andy was so used to being like in the details of everything and making everything perfect and doing it over and over until it fit the vision in his head, and is just so entwined in the material itself and wanted to take all the pains needed to make it perfect.
Yeah, he was the tortured artist doing his record, and Todd was the producer trying to, move it along and keep the inspiration and the flow of it all going. So, Todd was more global, and maybe Andy was being more granular, and Todd didn't think often that those granular elements really made that much of a difference for the end product.
And what about Todd's personality? Because it sounds, Andy Partridge, I know, is a very, very funny, witty, sharp person. Sounds like Todd is maybe a very similar personality,
Oh yeah, Todd's like a lot of fun, he's like really, just he's fun to be with. He's very thoughtful. He's extremely smart. I remember being up at his house one day, and the Jehovah Witnesses came up with pamphlets about religion, and he debated religion with them to the point where they just got in their car and they drove back down the
They
driveway
gave up.
and never came back because he knew more about their stuff and every other religion than they could even ever imagine. Now, Todd was a very brilliant guy. He is a very brilliant guy. He's all self-schooled, and he has pretty much expert level knowledge of such a wide variety of topics. It's really amazing.
And can that have a negative effect of rubbing up people the wrong way? You know, if he's sort of too clever or too sharp or too whatever it might take, because I think he's got I don't think Andy Partridge is the only person that he's argued with.
Yeah, I all the times I work with Todd, I never remember arguments with any bands in the studio. I remember arguments between bands, like the Psychedelic Furs. We used to have fist fights among themselves and all. But I remember things, we did a lot of records. A number each year. And they typically took a month, 5 or 6 weeks tops, Todd worked very quickly, and he worked quickly on his own records. He knew as he was working how he wanted it to sound. And when he mixed songs, he could mix 2 or 3 songs in a day, where a lot of producers at that time were spending, 2, 3, 4 days a week on one song. So I remember bands would say sometimes, well, we really like the mix, but he did it so quick. What if he spent more time? Would it be better? And Todd's, perception was, no, it wouldn't be better, because this was his inspired mix of the song that he's been listening to for a long time. And we didn't have automation in the studio, so you had to move the faders as you did the mix. It was actually a performance. It's not like Pro Tools now, where it remembers the song you did yesterday and just brings it right up for you. So it was a different style of working. Interesting thing with the XTC record, my recollection was we rented a Mitsubishi 2-track machine to mix down to. And that was the first time that we did that. And the machine was big. I think we had to leave it downstairs because it wouldn't go upstairs into the control room. And when the album was done, and Mary Lou Arnold and I were driving the tapes in one of the vans down to New York City to get mastered. Todd didn't typically go to the mastering sessions. He knew the mastering engineer he worked with, and was cool, and he listened to the mix on vinyl. But we were bringing it down, and we stopped at McDonald's on Route 17, which was this really busy road in New Jersey. And we got burgers and shakes, and we got into a serious accident on Route 17. And the shakes, a vanilla and a chocolate one, burst open and spilled all over the box of the XTC mixes that were all packed up with the label on it, and everything was Thatcher's ketchup. And
Oh my gosh.
we basically got rear-ended by a tractor trailer who didn't slow down for construction, and it was like 5 or 6 car pileup, and the tapes were all full of goo and glob, and we cleaned them off, and they got down to, I think, the next day to get mastered. But that was a funny ending, capping off the story.
Yeah, I've never heard that, and yeah, potentially catastrophic as well. I mean, it sounds like it worked out okay.
Yeah, well, luckily those boxes for the tapes they weren't made of just cardboard. They had some kind of filament in there or something that was some.
Never mind reverse polarity. That's Milkshake you can hear on that record.
Yeah. I just heard about that recently. And,
Does it make any sense to you?
Well, I have to talk to George Cowan, one of the engineers on the project. But if we use that Mitsubishi machine, it would seem like that would be a potential new area in the studio. If things got reversed, it probably was that machine getting wired into the system.
Yeah, especially if it was new and you were getting used to it and all the rest of it.
Yeah, it was rented. The machine was rented just for that session. And the machine was in the back of the van when we got rear-ended too. But it was in a road case and didn't get damaged, luckily, because it was probably an $80,000 machine at the time.
And how I've heard that XTC would come to, certainly with their earlier albums, they would come very well prepared. They would do a lot of rehearsal before they got to the studio. Was that the impression, compared with other bands and so on? Did they seem to know what they were doing in that sense?
Well, they were tremendous players, they were great players. But, Todd's concept was to have one song drift into the next song. And I think that was something the band wasn't expecting initially. I think they liked the idea when Todd presented it to him. From what I understand, Todd got all the demos, and he spent time at his house just reshuffle them around, figure which goes into what, and mapped out the whole record. So then I believe they had to, kind of relearn things. It wasn't like a song. It was one flowing to the next and little interludes and all. So I think that might have, slowed down the progress of just standing there and playing. Plus they didn't record to the drums. Prairie Prince played his drums out in California. He overdubbed them on this record. So they started doing the tracks without drums on it, I think without bass as well. And then the drums went on, and I think the bass went on. I believe Todd wanted the bass to go on next, but they decided to do the drums first. And Prairie's an amazing drummer, and I think he did a great job on the record. It's like really brilliant drumming. And then they brought it back to Todd's studio to finish up. So there was a lot of moving around, with the record. So it wasn't just all the band guys in the room with the drummer playing.
Yeah.
I think that's an aspect of Skylarking that's very well loved by fans. I know that transition from Summer's Cauldron into Grass is cited as one of the, best ever coupling of two songs. Yeah, it's wonderful.
I love that.
Yeah, and that presumably came from Todd. Because there are other examples in the XTC catalogue, aren't there, of songs that do that with a crossfade, but certainly this time it was Todd that was establishing the structure.
I think the other guys liked Todd because he liked a number of their songs.
Certainly Colin Molden gets a good hearing on Skylarking, and sometimes has fewer songs on other records.
So I think from that perspective, the other guys in the band liked working with Todd, because he did see them as three equals, in that way. So was what it was. Ultimately, it was a really good record, right? It ended up being a good record, and sometimes art is like that. There's a volatile side to it. There's a peaceful side to it, and they blend somewhere in the middle, and art comes out.
Andy does always talk about that it was always a very democratic process as far as what was going to be included. But I mean, I think, up to that point, he certainly, had a heavier amount of songs that were included. Yeah.
The thing with Todd, when Todd gets something that he wants to do, he's not going to be talked out of it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's going to, he's very confident that that's the right thing to do for the record. So I think maybe other producers with bands would, all right, we'll do it, And Todd, Todd's not the kind that would do things that way. And on the other hand, that methodology made him have a vision for someone like Meatloaf, who everyone passed up. No one wanted to sign Meatloaf. The album was done, and Bearsville Records didn't want the record. They had right of first refusal. Todd was, visionary with it, and he saw what he wanted, and he went for it. So he wasn't going to change what his vision was. And he always had a very strong vision for his projects. It wasn't like, let me just get in the studio and start recording stuff. He knew what he was going for.
Yeah, I think all the songs, as far as I'm aware, I think all the songs were picked before the band even got there. But I think I remember reading Andy say, or hearing him say in an interview, that I think they were surprised that Todd had the whole thing laid out, like the sequence of everything, how
the whole flow of the record. Yeah. Yeah. And don't forget, at that time, we're talking 36 years ago, people used to get records still and put them on and listen to side one and then flip it over and listen to side two.
Oh, sure. When my husband is playing something, he'll say side two. When we're listening to his CD, and he'll say, okay, end of side one, and now you turn it over. So he always has to point that out. Because that's how
we used to... We used to listen to records, and, when you were sequencing the record, you go, this sounds like the right song for the last song on side one. or the first song on side 2. Now people don't think like that
Mhm.
anymore because everything's shuffled around and one-offs and one song of this, one song of that. But the albums were conceived as, Sgt. Pepper was conceived. You would, to play all the way through. And I remember going home as a kid, putting it on my bedroom, and it wasn't just background music. I would sit there and listen to the whole side. And I think Todd's concept of this record was obviously like that,
Mhm.
because in the modern world, when you have songs that seg into each other on iTunes, it clips off. There's a little blip in between them. It doesn't want to flow from one to the other smoothly because no one listens like that anymore.
And what about you, Ralph, when you were in the studio, as you've been describing it, you were going from album to album, 6 weeks here, 6 weeks there, did it feel, and yet Skylarking is among XTC fans, well, many XTC fans anyway, will tell you that they think Skylarking is the pinnacle of among pinnacles. It's very high up in the estimation of XTC fans. And I'm just wondering whether, for you, was it just another album that you were doing, or did it feel like there was something special that marked it out from other things you were doing?
I felt like it was maybe a bit more special because I knew Todd was a big fan of XTC, that he liked the band, you know. Um, so so that made it special, and I just knew I just I liked the band too, and I knew they were bringing something cool, into the studio, and they were coming from overseas to do the record, and it was more of a bigger deal. I think it was a little, it was more expensive record to do because of going to LA and string section and and doing all that, and yeah, it was a nice record. Everyone was excited, to work on it. And Todd was doing, he did Cheap Trick and you know Meatloaf and a lot of people coming in and out of the studio and a lot of bands that we didn't know who they were, new bands, and it was a fluid. And maybe he would do 3 records a year, 3 or 4, and then he would tour, and there would be a Utopia record would be one of them in the middle somewhere at that time. So he was constantly busy, and he was also doing stuff like Pee Wee's Playhouse, doing the music for that. He was doing the music for Crime Story. He did the score for Dumb and Dumber movie, the first one, and so he always had projects coming into the studio.
Do you listen back to not just Skylarking, but any of the albums that you were making in that era, or is it part of your history that's just, do you move on?
No, sometimes I do. It's like, oh wait, I remember this. Let me put this on. Let me check this out. Let me listen to a few songs. I listened to Skylarking, recently, all the way through in the car, and yeah, it's cool.
And how do you think it stands? How do you think it stands up?
I liked it. I had forgotten a lot of the transition stuff between songs and how one thing's flowed into the other, and the energy behind a lot of the songs. And Save Enough for Us, I always liked that. Always liked that song.
Yeah,
I liked Andy's
yeah.
determination when he was singing. He was very real. When he sang it, and you felt like that he could tap into that working class British vibe, in a lot of the songs. Yeah, it's cool. It's really good.
Well, actually, that's reminded me that one of the things that's curious about Skylarking is that they went to America and to record it, and it's got the influence of working with an American producer, so they've got all of that American influence, and yet possibly it's their most English sounding record. It's a very English sort of experience. It's quite a dilemma there. Actually, you're all American.
Right.
You can discuss amongst yourselves about that.
Well, Todd also was producing a lot of Japanese artists, over the years too. They would come from Japan, and a lot of them hardly spoke any English. So that was interesting too. This one kid came over. He seemed very shy and withdrawn, and from meeting with Todd, and Todd worked on a single, and I didn't realize how famous he was in Japan, but they said in Japan at the time he was as famous as Michael Jackson. And then I saw something on 60 Minutes of him coming out of a stadium, getting in the car, and all these girls climbing on the car. But when he was at Todd's house, he just seemed like this really shy. Maybe Todd intimidated him so much being at Todd's house. I don't know, but no, we had a lot of interesting cast of musicians coming through. And for some records, we use session players when was a solo artist. We would get, Will Lee or Jerry Murata or someone to play on it. Todd would kind of say to me, we need a bass player and drummer, on Tuesday. And And then typically I would say, well, I could get Jerry Murata and Will Lee. Let me see if they're available. But Todd was cool with a bass player and drummer who were competent and good,
And in a way, that your input there, and coming, your choice of Jasmine as the singer there, that is effectively an artistic decision, because you could have chosen somebody else, or you could have brought in somebody else, and so it's contributing to the overall artistic
and a logistic
result.
decision.
In
Logistic decision to know that someone could do it quickly.
Yeah.
Otherwise, sorry. Next.
Quickly and reliably, I suppose, because you could have brought in somebody who wasn't very good, and then it would have been a bad decision.
Excellent choice all the way around.
Yeah. But did you have any artistic input into Skylarking or any other thing?
Not in that.
It wasn't collaborative in that sense.
Well, a good Italian food fed to a band is kind of is probably the key to the whole
process,
record.
yeah.
Inspiration.
Absolutely.
Homemade lasagna,
Yes.
But it's not the end of the Dear God story. You have more ambitions. Tell us about them.
I saw Jasmine a few months ago, and saw her sing with her dad. And I started thinking, it was around the time where I just randomly put on Skylarking to listen to it. And I always feel like I'm also an Aikido instructor, and it's a martial art, and there's a balance and harmony in Aikido, blending with movement and the universe. And I felt that there was something wrong in the universe for two reasons. One was when Jasmine did the song, and it was like 36 years ago, and it was just like a quick thing. It wasn't an afterthought, but it was a very quick in and out of the studio. She got paid $50 for the session, which at the time for a kid, an 8-year-old, wow, $50. But in retrospect, to sing on a song that featured her in a whole verse that's featured in a movie, that's, I just felt like something's wrong with the universe there. It should have been more money than that. Not that Todd or Andy had anything to do with had people that dealt with this, the cash flow and business manager and everything like that. At the time, it seemed like Jasmine said, well, $50, she was happy with $50. So that was one wrong in the universe, I thought. And the other was, like I said, when Jasmine saw the video, and she couldn't brag to her friends because they had a little boy singing. So that's kind of another wrong in the universe, speaking. And I thought it might be nice to right those two wrongs somehow. And also, Jasmine was telling me that she was getting contacted by fans, XTC fans, Todd fans. Are you the kid? Are you Jasmine? So I thought, well, Jasmine's a grown-up now. She's had a life from 8 years old. She's got kids. She's living in New York, still singing, doing her thing. And why not hear Jasmine's version of the song as a grown-up woman? And I thought that would be a really cool thing. So I was kind of thinking about how to go about doing this. And I thought, well, if I got Prairie Prince to play drums on it, that would be a really good foundational element to build the track from there. So I picked up the phone and I called George Cowan, who is a friend of mine. He's a recording engineer. He's one of the engineers from Skylarking. And he's Todd's live sound mixer nowadays. It's one of many things that he does. And I called him up. And I told him, look, I'd like to re-record Dear God with Jasmine singing as a grown-up. He thought, what do you think? He thought that was a brilliant idea. So I said, it would be really cool if, I could get Prairie to play the drums. I know Prairie, but I don't know him super well. And I said, do you know how to get in touch with them? He said, George said, well, this is freaky that you called me up because I'm rehearsing starting next week with Todd for a tour, and Prairie's the drummer on the tour. This is a few months, during COVID, coming out of COVID. So anyway, so I said, well, what do we do? He said, oh, I'll call you back. I'm going to call Prairie right now. So he hangs up. He calls Prairie up, and he calls me back 10 minutes later. He said, Prairie's totally into it. And he said, it's funny when he asked Prairie if he could play on the song. He said, Prairie said, I played on that song originally. And George was like, well, yeah, duh. That's why I'm asking you to do it, because you played on the original track. So anyway, so Prairie agreed to do it. And then so George said that they would try to do it during a sound check at one of the venues, at a Todd show. And a number of weeks went by, and it wasn't, it didn't happen yet. And then George was like, "Okay, we could do it soon," but George and I were trying to figure out how to do it. And George said, "What do you want?" I said, "I want Prairie to play exactly the same tempo, exactly the exact same part he played on the XTC record." And then we thought, well, he could just do it to a click. But then I thought, well, maybe I should build a track, like a scratch track for him to play along with. So the day before they were going to do it, I went into my studio where we are now, and I recorded like a drum loop, and I recorded the bass and the guitars for the song. And then I sent all the individual tracks to George. And that's what Prairie listened to in his headphones when he did the drums. So he recorded his drums for the new version of Dear God. He recorded it at the Chicago House of Blues. And George sent me the tracks. They sound awesome. I put them into Pro Tools. And then once I got that, I started, I did the guitars. I redid the acoustic guitar, redid the electric guitar, redid the bass. So the next step is Jasmine's going to sing a guide vocal or a scratch vocal, which could end up being the final vocal. And then I need to get strings put on it, the string part. And I'm going to get the guys from the band Tinui, I believe, who I was in that band. It's an Akron bass band. I'm going to have them sing with Jasmine at the end, that really intense part. Don't believe it. That part. I'm going to have them pan left and right with Jasmine in the middle, and we want to make that part like really intense and big. Of Jasmine as a grown up who now knows the price of beer and knows about God to sing that. So so that's how it's coming together, and thought it'd be a really cool thing to do that. XTC fans and Todd fans would be interested to hear Jasmine as a grown-up sing the whole song, sing her version of the song.
What about you, Jasmine? Jasmine, did you think there was something wrong with the universe? Did you think that this needed to be corrected?
I mean, I figured it was just a $50 session fee, and I honestly didn't think much of it at the time, because within the next couple years I had done small little sessions where it was like 75, 50.
That was a typical rate.
Yeah, I think there was one thing I did for Charlie Sexton with Bob Clearmountain, and I got $125 for that. And I was like, whoa, this is big money now. I'm in the game. I was like 12 or 13, I think.
And you guys know how famous Bob Clearmountain is as a producer,
and it was
right? This is the people Jasmine
It was a
singing.
remake of Cry Little Sister that he did, the song that was on the Lost Boys soundtrack, but it was a remake of that. So I was happy with $50. And then over the years, once I learned what, goes into making a song and all that goes with it, I was like, oh, well, I'm super happy to have been part of this history. And, it would have been cool to get more money, but I was okay with it.
What did you do with the $50?
I honestly don't know.
Coloring books?
I'm sure I bought some sort of... Honestly, I probably spent it on CDs or albums at that time is probably what I bought, because I was huge into Madonna and Cyndi Lauper and all of that at
The
that
interesting
time.
thing was Jasmine's parents are not like stage parents where pushing their kid to do this. All this stuff just kind of happened.
It was
organically
very
from
generic,
living in Woodstock.
organic, very organic. So yeah, I just, went about my business and ended up in an all-girl band when I was 15, and we had a development deal, and that was called Rock Candy, and I found, a love of songwriting through that group, and it became just part of my musical trajectory and part of what kind of formulated the musician that I turned into as I got older. So when he approached me about the idea, I was honestly a little like, you really think this is a good idea? Like, not embarrassed, but like, you think people would want that? Like, who wants that? And he's like, I just think it would be a really great thing, and think about it. So I thought about it. And then I got another message from somebody. And I thought, well, yeah, this is kind of interesting. And then the 35th anniversary happened of Dear God. And I made that post on Twitter. And I got so much response from that. And then I went back to him and I was like, okay, so maybe your idea is not a bad idea. And maybe this could be something pretty fun and pretty cool.
Right. So what, my vision of it is that, I'm putting together a Kickstarter to raise some money to do it. And, instead of the $50, I'd like Jasmine to get $5,000 if we can, and some money for production costs. And it'd be fun, I think, to do a video that parallels the XTC video in some way, with the tree, and to pay the musicians and give Prairie some money and give the other people play on the track. And George Cowan, one of the original engineers, is going to mix it. So we're tapping into some of the original talent on the thing.
History. Yeah.
So I think it's just a really cool thing. It'll have its place somewhere.
Well, I can also give you one of the original actors, Belinda Blanchard, who was up the tree. She's
really?
an XTC fan, or she became an XTC fan afterwards, and she's a friend of mine.
Oh, great!
So
yeah, absolutely.
You can actually recreate the video with the original or at least
I got
one of the
acquainted with her in a Facebook group. She messaged me. That was a fun hello. That was very cool.
Yeah. So I think we'll launch the Kickstarter sometime in June, and I'll let you guys know.
Yeah, well, we'll publicize it with this and let people know what where to check that. That sounds fun. That sounds really interesting. And that'll be this year. Then you'll be able to release it. Do you think?
Yeah, will be finished by the end of the summer. That's my goal. And the people with the Kickstarter will get a direct download, and we'll do other perks. Jasmine will come to your house and sing the first verse.
If they live somewhere warm,
at your Christmas party.
Yes.
Well, definitely looking forward to hearing that. That's a great idea.
Yeah. Jasmine, do you have a view on the way that you would sing it, an interpretation?
No and yes. I feel like the beginning was kind of just perfect in a way, like in hindsight, listening back at the song. There's just something about the innocence of a child singing that first verse, and then how you get to the end where the world is rattling, and people are falling from the trees. But the interesting thing is, when I was young, I was a very not meek singer, but I was small, and I was young, and I was small frame, and I've been singing for so long now. I feel like I'm more comfortable in my skin. I'm vocally, I feel like I know what my instrument can do and what it's capable of doing, and I feel like that song lends itself to being able to really convey a lot with your voice.
There's a big range, yeah.
Yeah, it has a long range, the crescendos and all of the ins and outs of the verses, and excuse me, and then the ride out, how it just crashes, and then at the end, I feel like I would know if he would have come to me with this maybe 15, 20 years ago. I don't think I would have felt comfortable in even attacking it. But I feel like I'm in a place now. I'm 46 years old. I have 3 kids. I've been through a lot, and I feel like almost more so now to be able to understand the lyrics even, to be able to convey what needs to be conveyed,
And the interesting thing is, when I did the work track for Prairie, I did it in the original key with the mindset that when Jasmine comes into the studio to, sing along with it, that we'd have to change the key to her voice now. But coincidentally, the original key is the perfect key for her now.
It's crazy.
So it's going to be in the original key that it.
And a lot of times when you change keys in songs, it's not that they don't sound good, but it does sort of lose something.
Yeah.
And to be able to do it in the same key, I feel like for this song is kind of important.
And this song had, has that acoustic guitar part, which is played in an open position like A minor and E, So if you had to change the key with a capo or something, it wouldn't be quite the same. And when I was re-recording the acoustic guitar, I remembered, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm like 99% sure, the guitar part, the acoustic guitar part, is a bass note and then a chord strum, kind of like Rocky Raccoon, boom, da da. That Todd had them play the bass notes separately from the chord notes. Typically, if you played live, you'd play both together. But when I listened to it, I was like, well, this sounds like it was done differently. And I kind of remember them doing it that way. So when I did it, that's the way I recorded the bass and the strumming part, bass on the acoustic guitar and the strumming part on the acoustic guitar.
The way that you're describing it so eloquently, Jasmine, now that you've had 35 years of living with that song, but all of the years as being a songwriter yourself and a musician and so on, how do you rate Dear God as a song, as just in terms of songwriting craft?
I mean, it's definitely probably up there. I would say solid 9.5 for sure. It takes a lot to go to that place, first of all, to write anything in that content.
It's not I love you, you love me.
Yeah, those kind of things. Yeah, you can delve deep and you can it's different. It's a totally different subject matter. We all know it's a totally different subject matter, but it's the eloquence of how he writes about it. Almost passive aggressively, but not, if that's possible, this well, if everything's so great, then how can everything be so screwed up, And that is pretty much the basic question that everybody thinks of when something goes wrong. When someone passes, they come up with all these, the good ones now, always go too soon, and you have to try and justify it. But when it really boils down to it, how can all this bad crap happen if there's something that's supposed to be so all-seeing, all-knowing? And for me now as an adult who is into this whole universe thing also, and the yin and the yang and the right and the wrong and the good and the bad and however you want to slice it, the way the song tackles that subject matter, for me, as a musician and as a songwriter, is almost perfect. I don't call any music perfection because for me, it's just, it's difficult for me. I think things are almost perfect. I don't call anything perfect because that's just the way I am. It's just the way I am. But I feel like it's really about as good as you can get. It ticks all those boxes. Emotion, lyrical content, music, the way it makes you feel. Does it make you think? Does it stick in your head?
The chords in the beginning are quite strange. Those acoustic guitar chords in the verse, there's a dissonance in the bass plucking movement of the acoustic guitar, and also at the end. I mean, Andy is seriously angry when he's singing it. I mean, you can hear it in his voice. The performance of that, and maybe in one aspect, working with Todd was maybe he got it all out. Maybe Todd, people say Todd is God. To all the Todd fans, Todd is God. So maybe he was looking up at the mirror into the control room and singing it to Todd. I don't know, but he gave it a phenomenal performance at that end. It's so intense, right? And then Jasmine's sweet little voice at the end. It's you, dear God. I mean, it's quite a brilliant song. I think probably a lot of people have not ever even heard it. I have some friends ask me, what have you been working on? I said, one of the things I'm doing is, recreation, Dear God. I said, oh, who's that? Oh yeah, I don't know if I heard that song. A lot of people haven't heard it. It's a song that, is just an amazing piece of work.
So interesting that they used it in the Stephen King movie too. Like, why that song? And why that one part of the song? And it's just, there's just so many things about the song that I think it just makes people feel and think and question. And that's kind of what good music is supposed to do, right?
Yeah. I agree with you, Jasmine. I connect really emotionally with the song. And I know a lot of what it says is, not just so out there. It's because it's the same thoughts that a lot of people have when they're sort of struggling with faith and, questioning things. And I can just remember like, oh, that's exactly what I thought. And even though a lot of people think exactly that, it still made me really connect with the song emotionally.
People are afraid to say it, and they're afraid to put it in a musical format where it hits you in the face like that song does.
I know that Andy, I know that he has expressed he was frustrated with the song or not happy with the song because there was so much more he wanted to say, and there's only so much you can fit in a 3.5, 4 minute song. But interestingly, you mentioned that first verse is so perfect for a child, and I wonder if you knew that Andy apparently got the idea of it being like a letter to God because he saw a book that was a collection of letters children had written to God. So it actually is kind of taken from that as a letter to God, and
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But the other thing with Andy singing that song is that, you often assume a character when you sing a song, right? You're either the singer-songwriter, but sometimes you're the person, like Paul Simon singing The Boxer. He was this poor boy in New York. He assumed that person. And Andy assumed the personality of like kind of a British working class dude, with the price of beer. And, he establishes that in the beginning of the song. So then at the end, his rant to God is from a common folk. You know what I mean? That has seen life and seen things happen, and like, why is this happening? I think it makes it more powerful because he's in some sort of character when he's singing it. Part of the character is him as a person, but he's tapping into that, I think, much more to put the song across.
In the documentary, This Is Pop, that I was talking about a little while back, there's part of that documentary. It shows like a scene, and it looks like a notebook, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, wait a minute, is that a verse of Dear God that didn't make it into the final version? And
oh really?
Oh yeah, and I stopped. I got it on my phone, and I stopped it, and I like zoomed in, and I took notes. I'm like writing out, I've got the lost verse. Like I've discovered something here. Yeah. Like those are Andy's personal notes. And then if not very much longer after that, I ordered the book, Complicated Game. And there's a shot of it right in there. Like I must have taken 30 minutes, like zooming in and
it was there already.
Wow. But it's in that book, yeah. And it's an interesting verse. I'm not sure why he didn't put it in. Maybe it was just too long.
Too long.
But I think it's pretty perfect as is.
Although I suppose it points out that he does take his lyrics seriously, and he doesn't just sort of dash them off, and he'll work on them and revise them and work.
Right.
Work
and Todd's like that. I remember him sending bands, I don't remember what XTC, but with other bands, and just say, the song's not ready yet. The lyrics can, work on this, work on that. And he wouldn't roll tape unless he was comfortable with how the song was, and the song and the music and the melody were most important. He wasn't really a gearhead. When with studio gear, he would like to have cool things to play with, to use. But as far as instruments and go, I was telling someone the other day, he didn't never even have like a big guitar collection. Any guitarist in a typical bar band would have far many more guitarists. He didn't even have a great acoustic guitar in the studio. I used to bring mine up when, we had to do acoustic guitar. He had, just he had an odd, like a PV bass that was really horrible that I think that he used it on Bang the Drum all day. He just made it work. We had a mediocre set of drums, a little baby grand or a little bigger than baby grand Yamaha piano that wasn't great, but that wasn't a problem. It wasn't in the instruments and everything, or the amps. It was in the music, and that's how Todd approached things, which I learned a lot, from that. You go into your studio and you be creative and inspired, and the music will show that when it's finished.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, and I think we've run out of time, really. But we should thank you for both of your contributions to such a seminal album, and anticipate what you're going to do next. And there will be a link that will include on the podcast, on the webpage, or wherever it is that you're listening to this, for the crowdfunder, so that you can contribute to your very own future, dear God. So thank you very, very, very much indeed to Jasmine, Ralph and Leslie for having such a fascinating conversation.
It was fun.
It was
Thank
great
you.
fun.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
And thanks, Leslie, for joining us.
Thank
It's been-
you.
Yeah, it was awesome.
What do you call that noise?
Thank you once again to Jasmine, Ralph and Leslie, and to songwriter Craig Stevens, of course. Many, many thanks to the podcast supporters on Patreon who make it all possible, including the following Knights in Shining Karma: Terry Arnott, Kevin Burt, Cale Corbett, Liam Duggan, Jamie Dunn, Leslie Gooch, Robert Graham, Alan Hughes, Marek Kraus, Jesper Kumberg, Robert Lawlaw, Dennis LeCourrier, Liz Lynch, Ian Morris, Yusuf Murrah, Amy Parkinson, Murray Meikle, Karen Neal, Doug Perry, Mark Reed, James Reimer, Simon Slatehome, Michael Sutcliffe, Mark Thomas and Nigel Waller. And if you'd like to support the XTC podcast, you can do so at patreon.com/Mark Fisher. Thank you very, very much for listening. I'll be back again next month with even more XTC goodness. See you then. Bye.